What's killing the atheist movement? This rather melodramatic question was posed a week before last by David Smalley on an episode of Dogma Debate and a corresponding blog article. And it was responded to by PZ Myers, and then David and PZ appeared together on the next episode of Dogma Debate, and they sort of had a debate about it. And some other people who were involved in the situation that precipitated David Smalley to write that blog post and ask that question wrote their own commentaries on it, and I have a bunch of stuff linked in the description box of this video that you can listen to and read if you want. What I'm going to say is not a direct response to any of it, but all of it has sort of gotten me to think about a few things that are related to the question of what is wrong with the atheist movement, or what is killing the atheist movement, if indeed something is killing it. And questions about how we approach conflict with other atheists, and all sorts of other things that I have talked about a little bit before in the past, but I've just had these sorts of questions and problems churning around in my head for the last 2 weeks while thinking about this problem, this issue. So I'm going to just blather on about it for a few minutes. And if you want to know a little bit more about what has inspired me to talk about this right now, the links are in the description box. You can check it out for yourself. First of all, I don't think anything is killing the atheist movement, but I do think there are some things holding the atheist movement back. And what is holding the movement back from making that progress? Well, in the minds of some people, one of the things holding us back is that it's too difficult for atheists to get along. We fight amongst each other too much. We have too many inter-atheist squabbles, and that keeps us from focusing on the big picture issues and making progress. And to an extent, I agree. But when some of the most visible members of the atheist community are blatant anti-feminists and rape apologists, or use their platforms to espouse racism, just flat out racism, or use their platforms to incite abuse and harassment against others, to take part in cyberbullying, to attempt to use their mob of followers to silence other people. These are not trivial problems to me. And these are not people. The people who engage in that type of behavior, they are fellow atheists of mine. Unfortunately, I'm embarrassed to say that, but they are fellow atheists of mine. I have no interest in getting along with them. I have no interest in making peace with them. I don't want to unify with them, and I don't particularly want to be a part of an atheist movement that seeks to unify with them. One of the problems, I think, with the atheist movement, and one of the things that is holding it back, is not that we can't get along. It's that the perception is that we as a group are perfectly fine with the loud, obnoxious, bullying, bigoted members of our group. We'll just pretend they aren't there, even though they have, in many cases, hundreds of thousands of followers on social media and are leaving a very large footprint in atheist circles and are having a great deal of influence on the voice and the character of the atheist community and the atheist movement as it is perceived, especially from the outside. If we're disagreeing over pizza toppings, okay, we can get past that. If we're disagreeing over which team we're going to root for in the World Series, you know what? I'll pull for the Orioles. You pull for the Cubs. That is not necessarily a prediction, by the way. And may the best team win. No problem, right? We can get past that. That's not anything that's going to cause a schism that can't possibly be closed. But if one side is pushing misogynist bullshit, if one side is pushing harmful false narratives about women, or about black folks, or about Muslims, or about name your marginalized group, and the other side is people saying, oh, hey, that's not cool, I don't think that's a disagreement that can or should be reconciled. I don't think a disagreement over whether or not racism is still a problem in our modern society is a trivial disagreement that we should just sweep aside, because that disagreement and the assumptions that underlie that disagreement will have ramifications throughout the community, throughout the movement. How welcome do you think black non-believers would feel in an atheist community, an atheist movement, where the majority of white atheists believe that racism isn't really a problem and that black folks just need to suck it up and grow up and just deal with their problems and stop trying to talk about systemic racism and institutional discrimination and all of these other things? How do you think that would make, how would you feel if you were in that situation, if you were a black non-believer and you found that attitude among white folks in your group to be very prevalent? Or at least, if not prevalent in terms of the number of people who hold those attitudes, at least a very loud portion of your movement was trumpeting that attitude, or was nodding their head. We're nodding their heads and we're saying, yeah, that makes sense to me. Or when you bring it up to them and when you say, hey, you know, I'm kind of worried about this atheist over here with the big YouTube channel who is saying that racism isn't a problem and that black people shouldn't really talk about it, or that black people need to just, you know, not stop trying to get everybody to talk about racism, all that really bothers me. And you bring that up to maybe one of your white atheist friends and they say, that's no worry about it, no big deal. Stop, let's talk about something important. How do you think that would make you feel? Or if you were a woman and you tried to raise the issue of sexism in the movement and you were constantly shushed, or your concerns were minimized, or people were pointing out things like, oh, well, but there's a woman who's the head of this organization. And what about this YouTube channel is owned by a woman and she's really popular in the atheist community. So see, I think you're worried about nothing. How do you think that would make somebody feel? How would you feel if you were in the situation of that hypothetical woman? And how would you feel if someone said, you know, you're just sowing conflict. You just need to learn to get along with people. You need to learn to be more tolerant of disagreement. Speaking of false narratives, there's a false narrative I've had my fill of. The idea that the source of the conflict between the so-called SJW types in the atheist movement and the so-called alt-right types, or the more, what I would call the toxic faction, that the source of it is just, well, the SJW types, they can't handle disagreement. When I moderate my comment sections on my videos, and I've been very open about that. I moderate comments on my videos. I use the block button and the mute button very liberally on Twitter. And when I use those functions to screen people out of my platforms, or to ignore people who I have decided I don't want to talk to or I don't want to hear from, I've never done it just because someone disagreed with me. I have done it to people who disagree with me about stuff, but never for trivial disagreements. Disagreements about important stuff. Disagreements about whether or not feminism is a positive force in our culture, or whether it's cancer. Disagreements on whether racism and white supremacy are actual problems in our society that need to be addressed, or whether they're just figments of oversensitive black folks' imaginations. See, I don't consider that a trivial disagreement. And I don't consider those ideas, the ideas of people who want to push those narratives, that racism is no longer a problem, that sexism isn't a problem, or at least that sexism isn't a problem in the West. I have no interest in hosting those ideas on my platforms, and I have no interest in wasting time talking to people who hold those ideas. And I would really like it if the atheist movement and the atheist community in general were way less accepting and tolerant of people with those ideas, because those ideas are repugnant and awful and bigoted and backwards, and they are holding us back. The atheist movement, for those of you who don't know, is a human rights movement. The atheist movement, despite how some people might try to characterize it, despite how strenuously some people might try to deny it, despite how uncomfortable this term makes some people, is a social justice movement. And a social justice movement cannot be successful if it includes and embraces and tolerates viewpoints from people who consider the very concept of social justice to be cancerous. Here's a thought. If you are a member of the atheist movement, you are active in some way, you're an activist, you are an organizer, you write a blog or host a podcast or host a YouTube channel, and your response to the toxic atheists, the ones that spew racism and misogyny and religious bigotry, if your response to them is silence, but your response to those who speak out against them is to caution them about sowing discord and dividing the community, I think it's you who are holding the movement back. This conflict that I've been referring to in this video, this conflict between the more socially conscious atheists and the toxic, asshole, obnoxious, bigoted, bullying atheists, this conflict is not what is holding the atheist movement back. What is holding the atheist movement back is that there are too many atheists in the group, including relatively prominent members of the group, who are treating the conflict as though it's trivial. This is not a trivial conflict, and the result of this conflict will determine not only the character, but the ultimate fate of this movement. And if you're someone who wants to see the atheist movement grow in influence and relevance, eventually, you are going to have to come around and accept the fact that not all of the disagreements that separate atheists from other atheists are trivial disagreements. Some of them are downright fundamental. And the question of what kind of a movement we are going to be is maybe the most fundamental question that activists or would-be activists in the atheist movement can wrestle with. Are we going to be a serious, legitimate social justice, human rights movement? Or are we going to be a movement that tolerates and tacitly supports, or in some cases explicitly supports, people who spew racism and misogyny and rape apology and religious bigotry? We can't be both. We have to be one or the other. And wanting to be the former, wanting to be the legitimate social justice movement, does not require us to become an echo chamber, does not require us to sacrifice our ideological diversity. A real legitimate social justice movement, like feminism, or like the Black Lives Matter movement, is a place that plays host to energetic, vigorous debates, that is a place of great disagreement, of great ideological diversity. Anyone who tells you that feminists practice some form of groupthink and don't tolerate dissent either doesn't know anything about feminism or is someone who is selling you a bill of goods, is someone who is trying to mischaracterize a movement in order to legitimize his own bigotry by saying, oh, those feminists, they didn't like what I had to say. What a bunch of group thinkers. What a bunch of special snowflakes. What an echo chamber they have over there. Legitimate social justice movements like feminism, like Black Lives Matter, like LGBTQ justice movements are very tolerant and welcoming of disagreement, of legitimate disagreement. Not so tolerant of bigotry, not so tolerant of bullying, not so tolerant of harassment. So, atheist movement, we can be one or the other. We can be a serious, legitimate movement that will actually do some good for people, or it can be a clubhouse for assholes. It's got to be one or the other. Can't be both. And it's not just the assholes that are holding us back, although the assholes are definitely doing a lot of the heavy lifting there. It's also the people that make excuses for the assholes and that tell people to stop complaining so much about the assholes. You're causing too much conflict. You want to know what's holding back atheism? I don't know if anything's killing it quite yet, but you want to know what's holding it back? The assholes and their apologists. That's what's holding it back. Hey folks, hope you enjoyed this one. If you did, please like, share, and subscribe, and also please consider helping me to make more videos like this one by supporting this channel through Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/Steve Shives to become a patron. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.